Hey there, singers, public speakers, and content creators. My name is Clay Collins, and this is the My Voice Mentor podcast. Man, I have really missed this. My gosh. I took an unintended several-month break from the podcast. It was actually unintended. For those of you who have been following and listening to the podcast, you thought, where did he go? Yeah, so sorry about that. But I am back, and it was really interesting as I began the steps and the processes to hit record. All those old nerves came back. It was almost like I was doing it for the first time again. It was really interesting, and it really did spark some thoughts that I want to share with you today. In this process of my growth, in this process of your growth, it's really important to begin to identify our blind spots, our barriers along the way. And I want to try to identify some of those things so that you and I continue to stay on a steady road to growth and progress. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you, it's still available to everybody to go to myvoicementor.com/bootcamp in order to get my 5-day free vocal bootcamp. If you're wanting to improve your voice and you're wanting a free way to do it, this is really the best way for you to get 5 daily lessons. They're going to give you some tips and tricks right now to improve your voice, whether it is singing that you're after, public speaking, or content creation. Maybe you want to start a podcast like me. Maybe you want to be a YouTuber. I tell you what, it's a whole new world of opportunities for those who build and develop their voice. And I want to give you some steps and some tools in order to do that. And if you stick with me to the end of the podcast, I'm going to show you a way that you can actually join my voice mentoring program free for 30 days, absolutely free. All right, enough of that. I want to talk today about some of the things that have been coming up in my live Zoom coaching sessions, which, boy, I'd love you to join and become a part of those because some really amazing things are happening. But a lot of interesting discussions have come up with my vocal students and apprentices that I wanted to enlighten and share with you today, because there's a recurring theme that tends to come up. And it's this idea, and perhaps you've heard the term, I am my worst critic. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Have you ever said that about yourself? I am my worst critic. It's a fairly common thing. And I really, as I think about that as a concept, it's really quite shocking how damaging that kind of a philosophy is. And really, how many of us convince ourselves that is actually not only an acceptable position to take with yourself, to be your own worst critic, but that it really does stunt your progress. And we want to try to identify some of the pitfalls, and that's a real big one. One of the things that I hear people say a lot is, if I'm hard on myself, then others will be less hard on me. And in other words, if I critique myself, then I won't be opening myself as much to outside criticism. And it's true, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I want to just say right out of the gate, this area that I'm talking about today is one that I have probably struggled with more than anything in my life. I still have not overcome it today. I still have to fight that tendency and that urge to be my own worst critic. And it's something that I have to be intentional about every day, of making a choice that I choose not to be that, but to be something else. But we rationalize it by thinking, I just would rather be hard on myself. If I'm harder on myself, then hopefully externally, the external criticism will be less. Sometimes we have the motivation of being extra hard on ourselves to try to minimize or limit outside criticism. First of all, that's a bad approach, because if my goal is to minimize outside criticism, I'm only opening myself up to the criticism that I can see, or the pitfalls that I can see. And the reality is I am not all-seeing and all-knowing when it comes to me. In fact, I am less aware of my issues. I am keenly aware of other people's issues. I think there's even a Bible verse about this, that's you're so quick to remove the speck out of someone else's eye while you've got a log in your own. Exactly. So in a sense, yes, we want to examine ourselves before we offer criticism. That's really good advice. But the flip side of that is, if you are continually hard on yourself because you don't want external feedback, there might be something constructive that somebody would say that you don't see. So it's just not a very good strategy. It's also not good for your heart. When you're hard on yourself, that means when you don't hit it out of the park. How many of you out there, when you fall or you fail, or my gosh, God forbid, you're up in front of hundreds of people and you crack a note and you're like, oh gosh, it's awful when you feel that way. And it's so much worse when you have a perspective of being your worst critic, because everybody else is like, it wasn't a big deal. Don't worry about that. That's okay. Everybody's going to forget about it. Don't worry about that. You did great. You did fine. But you're like, no, it was terrible. Yeah, which kind of leads me to my next point. To be your own worst critic basically still means that you are focusing on yourself. It's a very self-centered position to take. That if I'm great, I'm happy. If I'm not great, I'm sad. Now, that's very self-centered. It's very prideful. And we don't want to be that. Of course not. The third thing I want to say about that is being your worst critic is rooted in another thing that we have talked about, but we're going to continue to talk about because it's a big issue, and that is perfectionism. Perfectionism would cause you to be your worst critic. Because when that perfect idea in your head is examining against something that's always going to be imperfect, you're always going to see the bad and the things that are not lining up to perfectionism. Well, I want to try to aim an arrow straight at perfectionism right now, because perfectionism is absolutely not helpful on the road to progress. It's absolutely not helpful. And I'm going to explain why. Perfectionism is expressed in at least two ways. One of them is the things that I do perfectly. Most of us don't feel that way. Some of us might. Everything I do is perfect. But the more common expression, which is more like most of us, is I only do things that I can execute perfectly. Now, that is probably more ringing true for most of us, meaning that I'm not going to step out and do something that I am either very bad at, not very good at, or less than perfect in. We tend to withdraw from areas that we are not perfect in. And the problem with either one of those approaches is, first of all, it's all rooted in pride, because to imagine yourself achieving perfection is prideful, because none of us will. We all fall short of perfection. It doesn't matter where you are in your journey. You're always going to fall short of that level of perfectionism. The first thing I would encourage you to do is just don't set perfection as the goal. Because when you set perfection as the goal, you are setting yourself up for failure 100% of the time. That is a losing strategy by its very definition. If we can all agree, which I believe we can, that perfection is unattainable, that means every single time we shoot for perfection, we are falling short of that. Therefore, we are shooting for a goal that is leading us into failure 100% of time. If you want to fail 100% of the time, go for perfectionism. Now, I'm not opposed to failure. In fact, I think failure is an important part of the journey. But there is a good way to fail, which is replacing perfectionism with progress, because perfectionism is a direct enemy of progress. Going back to what I said before, if we only attempt things that we have an envision or a possibility of being perfect in, we're limiting the scope of what we can accomplish, whether it's our voice or whether it's our communication skills or whether it's our fear of getting up in front of people, whatever the case may be. If we're shooting for perfection, that really does filter the things that we would even be willing to try. And just like I said before, every time we seek perfection, we fail. But if we were to flip that and say, okay, I'm not going to aim for perfection, I'm going to aim for progress. Now, what does that look like? That simply looks like, am I getting better in an area that I'm working on? Am I getting better? And guess what? The level of progress doesn't matter. What we're looking for here is, am I gaining ground on this at all? Even a 0.2 adjustment is significant. And here's why that sets you up for success 100% of the time. Because with a progress-minded approach to your voice, even when you fail, you can still identify progress. Did you catch that? That is really, really huge. If I go for something and I fail, but in my approach, in my execution, I did better than the previous time, then that failure was a success. If I'm striving for perfection, that failure is a 100% L. It's a lose. It's a losing strategy. But when I go for progress, even my failures work towards moving that ball forward and moving it into progress. For me today, me pushing myself forward is, you know what? You just got to hit record. It's been months since I've done this, guys. It's been months. And so you get a little rusty. I know maybe for some of you, it's been a little bit since you've sung. It's been a little bit since you've tested out your voice. And sometimes you just got to do it afraid. Sometimes you just have to open your mouth and just see what comes out. So I want to talk about some strategies along the lines of progress that I think are going to be really helpful for you. In our classes, there was a conversation that started between me and one of the other students, and she just made the comment. It was really awesome. She was vulnerable, and she said, I haven't been making the kind of progress I want with my voice. I said, all right, let's lean into that. The first thing I asked her, is there something specific that you're trying to accomplish that you're not getting anywhere in, or is this more of a general, you don't like where your voice is? And she said, yeah, it's more of the latter. I don't like where my voice is. I said, is there any specific thing, like an objective thing that you're looking to improve on? No, not really. I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like it. And so then I asked her, because we talk about this a lot in the class and I talk about it a lot here. Are you regularly recording your voice? Are you grabbing your phone, this device, and recording it and playing it back? And she says, I did that a little bit in the beginning, but I've stopped doing that. I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. Why have you stopped? And her answer was, because I don't like the sound of my voice. Okay. In the back of my mind, I thought, I think that's probably what she's going to say. That's usually the case. I just couldn't take listening to my voice. The moment that happens, and it's a very common thing, I was actually very glad that it happened in real time, happened in our class. Everybody could listen on because everybody, even though she was the one talking about it, everyone in the space, including myself, could relate to us. Oh, totally have been. You're probably out there going, yeah, I can relate to that exactly. It's the most common thing. It was just awesome that she shared it because she gave a voice to everybody who had felt very similar things. And so my advice to her and my advice to you is, okay, step one, you have to listen to your voice regularly. You have to record it and you have to play it back regularly. You have to get a regular diet of hearing the sound of your own voice. And before you do anything in the way of critiquing your voice, identifying issues, don't do any of that. I don't want you to do any of that until you're able to fall in love with your voice. Now, that seems like a hard thing. But it really isn't. One of the biggest problems that we have when it comes to our voice is that we really don't experience our voice. We use it and we execute it, but we don't experience it. And so it's very natural in those rare occasions that we hear our voice played back either on, back in my day, it was called a tape recorder. We don't have those anymore. We have our phones and we have voicemails that we might create and listen back to. But most commonly, we would record ourselves on our phone and play it back. If we don't have a regular diet of listening to the sound of our voice, it's going to become very unfamiliar. And when you listen to your voice, it's not that you don't like it. It's that it's extremely unfamiliar to you. So therefore, something that you're unfamiliar with, your brain is telling you that's you, but your ears are hearing it going, that can't be me. That doesn't sound like me. That doesn't feel like me. That feels like somebody else. And it's almost like you're looking at a stranger or listening to a stranger, but your brain is telling you that's you. And the reality is that whenever our ears hear something that we're not familiar with, our natural tendency is going to be, I don't like that. I don't like it. It's not that you don't like it. It's unfamiliar to you. We have to become familiar with the sound of our voice. One of the other questions I asked her is, are you more of an introvert or an extrovert? And we wrestled with that a little bit, and she determined, yeah, I'm definitely an introvert. I said, when you walk into a room and you're hearing a bunch of unfamiliar voices, Are you excited or are you a little nervous and shy? She says, oh, definitely nervous and shy. I said, since that's true of outside voices, wouldn't that also be true with your voice if what you're hearing is not very familiar to you? So already the light bulbs were beginning to go off, and she was like, okay, that really makes a lot of sense. I said, so step one is just get to know your voice. Get familiar with it. You need to get to the point where you can hear your voice and not cringe without making changes. In fact, in this season, don't even go invest in a season where you're not trying to make changes. Don't go, oh, I want to change that. I want to change that. Because if we don't find a love for our voice and we start making changes, then we're going to start putting false things into our voice. And then we have to take those out later. So let's not do that. If you're struggling with the sound of your voice, record it and play it back and commit, whether it's a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, that your commitment in that season is merely to find the love and joy in your voice as it is. It's the very first step. This goes right back to the very first episode. You've got to love your voice before you can properly invest in it. Okay? Makes sense? So step one, record your voice. Step two, find the love in your voice. Start loving it. The moment you're listening to it, you haven't made any adjustments, but you're like, I'm getting a little bit more familiar with my voice and I don't hate it as much as I do. Okay, guess what? That's progress. You've made progress. You hate your voice less. Great. A little further down the road, you begin to like your voice. Okay, great. Then, all right, you know what? And this comes with intention, by the way. This isn't something that you passively receive. It's not like all of a sudden one day you're going to wake up loving your voice. This is something that you have to be intentional about. I'm going to choose to actively love the sound of my voice. Without critique, without adjustment, I'm going to choose to love the sound of my voice. Okay? All right. Now, let's say that you've gone a few steps down that road, and now you can honestly say that you love your voice. You're like, I can't even imagine that. But trust me, you can do it. Then it's time to make adjustment. Because now, because you love your voice, now you will begin to identify some things. Okay, I'm struggling in my pitch. I love my voice, but I'm struggling with pitch. Or I really love my voice, but I can see my rhythm is not so great. Or, man, I really love my voice, but my style is a little off. It's not quite translating. Or I love my voice, but the emotion isn't quite there. I'm not quite feeling it. I don't feel it when I listen to myself sing, and I want to be able to feel it. Okay, this is fantastic because now we're at some objective things that we can identify. Now that we've overcome just simply hating our voice, which just shuts down the conversation, now we're like, okay, here are some objective things that I can identify because I love my voice. I want to invest in my voice, but these are just some things. Then the next step that I would say is that third step, identify one thing at the top of your list that you'd like to invest in. I call it your mountain for the foreseeable future. Everybody has a mountain, and you might have more than one mountain, but we don't want to try to climb 5 mountains. We want to climb one mountain. So that mountain for you might be, man, I really need to focus on pitch. My pitch is all over the place. I don't know where the notes are. I can't perceive them. I'm struggling. All right. Then you need to get on a regime where you're practicing singing on pitch. Part of this goes to slowing down the songs that you're singing. If you're singing along to a YouTube video, slow that thing down so that you can focus not on the quality of your voice, not on the style, but literally focusing on hitting and sustaining the right notes. And that comes with time. And that comes just like a piano player like me. If I'm learning how to play notes for the first time, I have to slow that pattern down and do it very slowly. So if it's something that you're singing, like Twinkle Little Star, you just start with twinkle, 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 little star. If it's Twinkle Little Star, you're going to want to be like twinkle, twinkle, little star, and then repeat it. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Another way to practice pitch that we can all do, if you have access to a piano, you can just play individual notes on the piano and just try to hum that pitch. It's best to start towards the middle of the piano. It doesn't matter what size your piano is. Start towards the middle because those are within the vocal range. If it's too high, you can go lower. But hit a note and then see how quickly you can match that note. It's a great little exercise. I call it target practice, where you just hit your finger on one of the notes on the keyboard and sing it back. If you don't have access to a piano, you can get a piano app on your iPhone, Android, or whatever screen device you have. We know we all have those. And just play a note, sing it back. There's also a ton of ear training free exercise that you can find with a simple Google search. So that's just one example. If you're struggling with your breathing, that's a bigger one. But that's, for some, that's their mountain. A lot of air is leaking out when they sing and they just are constantly trying to catch their breath. That's focusing on breath support, figuring out how to hold on to more of that air so that you get more sound and less air. I've got some great courses on that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the end, but that might be your mountain to climb for a season. You might be struggling in the area of style. Maybe you started out your journey in the classical or choral side of things, and you're finding it difficult to translate into a more pop or contemporary setting. Okay, for you, that season might look like really taking on some models or mentors that are singing the way you'd like to sing and try to figure out what they're doing. Model what they're doing with their voice, the placement, how they're making the sounds. A lot of vocal development is mimicking the sounds that we hear. In fact, that is probably the best way. So the point is with all of this, that whatever your mountain is, once you've overcome your perfectionism, and once you've overcome being your worst critic, now you're turning that on its head. And instead of becoming your worst critic, you're actually becoming your best critic. And that really is what I'd like your takeaway to be today, is become your best critic. It's very good to be a constructive, critical voice in your life. It's good for you to try to identify things before they become a problem in an uncomfortable setting. Obviously, we want to identify problems before getting up in front of people. Obviously, we can't eliminate that 100%, but sure, that is a very good way to exercise a critical approach to our voice. But that type of criticism is always helpful. It's always relatively non-emotional. You look at it completely without shame or embarrassment. You look at it objectively. Hey, I need to work on pitch. If you're struggling with pitch, I can honestly tell you, I have never met a singer that didn't invest in that and gain a ton of progress and actually climb and conquer that mountain. If that happens to be your mountain and someone had told you along the way you're tone deaf, I'm telling you that is absolutely not true. You can overcome whatever mountain it is, but the only way to get there is to overcome your perfectionism, love your voice, and then finally just identify that mountain and begin taking steps of progress to begin climbing that mountain. Your goal in day one is not to get to the top of the mountain. Your goal is to gain in altitude. Hey, if you're 10 feet higher today than you were yesterday, that's fantastic. Embrace, and this is the final thing that I would say, embrace the small wins along the way. In short, embrace the journey. Don't ever get to the place where you've arrived. Always there's a higher mountain and a higher plateau to reach for. Progress is never ending. And boy, think about it. If you ever were to achieve perfectionism, your journey would be done. And there'd be nothing else to strive for. There'd be nothing else to work towards. That's no fun. You don't ever want that journey to be over. Mainly today, I really just want to help change your mindset and change your thinking around perfectionism versus progress. Let's stay on this journey and let's identify the barriers that are keeping us from moving forward. Because I promise you, if you move forward with intention, you will always make progress. Therefore, you will always be successful at what you do when perfectionism is not your barrier. Awesome. I hope that I've given you some things to think about. And again, as I promised before, I want to give you access for 30 days, absolutely free, literally no strings attached. Okay. Come join my voice program. You'll get hours and hours of fabulous online video training of me teaching you how to identify specific things in your voice. you also get up to 8 hours of live coaching with me in a group setting with other people also on this journey, just like you. Absolutely going to love being in these classes. Everybody is so supportive and they're all on the same journey. And I tell you what, there's nothing better than doing this with other people. It's super fun. You get opportunities to sing and to get helpful feedback from me and the rest of the group. It's really great. Don't be scared of that. Seriously, it is one of the most valuable things you can do. I want to give you 30 days free access. All you got to do is go to the link in the description or the show notes if you're listening to this on the podcast. And again, as a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, hit that like and subscribe. We want to make sure that more people get access to this awesome content. I hope it was useful to you today. I'm so sorry it's been so long. I've missed you. I hope you've missed me too. But stay tuned for many more episodes to come. They're going to be releasing weekly, Friday morning on Spotify and Apple, and Thursday at 7 on YouTube. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you're notified of new episodes as they come. In the meantime, keep investing in your voice. It's the best investment you can make.